Now, it goes without saying that any sufficiently popular Hollywood movie will spawn a glut of imitators. Studios producing films for mere fractions of a Hollywood blockbuster will often use those hit movies as inspiration to create their own like-minded knockoffs in the pursuit of a cheap buck. And some of these are so absurd and so obviously ripping off their source material that you genuinely won't believe they exist. So let's take a look at them. This is Whatculture.com, and these are movie rip-offs you won't believe exist. Star Odyssey. The success of Star Wars: A New Hope of course spawned a glut of low-budget cash-ins, perhaps the most infamous of which is 1979's Star Odyssey, a hilariously naff Italian ripoff directed by Alfonso Brescia. Within 3 years of A New Hope's release, this director had 5 sci-fi films in a similar vein, with Star Odyssey, the fourth in his series, being the most obviously indebted to George Lucas's groundbreaking blockbuster. I mean, where to even begin? Just look at it. The heroes have lightsabers, while the droids just are C-3PO and R2-D2. From top to bottom, this thing is the textbook example of a thrown-together cash grab. The sets, costumes, and makeup all look hilariously horrid, with the lightsabers actually being cardboard swords that have just been painted with fluorescent colors. Despite occasionally achieving a compelling level of off-kilter weirdness and boasting hilariously bad English dubbing, its attempt to make easy cash off the back of Lucas's hard work evidently didn't pan out, as Star Odyssey quickly evaporated into the cultural ether.
Bloody Murder. Written by John R. Stevenson and directed by Ralph E. Patillo, Bloody Murder and its sequel, Bloody Murder 2: Closing Camp, are like kindergarten collages of ideas and scenes snipped from better movies. The most obvious lift, of course, is from Friday the 13th. The setting is Camp Placid Pines, covering for Camp Crystal Lake, of course, and the killer wears a hockey mask and boiler suit combo. There's also a suspiciously similar plotline involving an urban myth of a bullied and abused child who, fully grown, now supposedly haunts the woods near the camp. His name as well is Trevor Moorehouse, because I guess Voohouse would have been maybe a step too far. To be fair though, Big Trev isn't actually the main killer here. Instead, Placid Pines' not-so-happy camp counselors are being terrorized by a psychopath with a grudge because of an incident in the past that sees a person cosplaying as Moorehouse in order to carry out the murders. Both films spin out various unlikely red herring scenarios before the mass murderer is revealed, and if that sounds oddly similar to the plot of every Scream movie ever, then congratulations, you've just identified the other major lift this franchise makes from the canon.
Inseminoid. In the very least, Inseminoid has the most eye-catching title on this list, and compared to something like Star Odyssey, actually looks like a real movie. A blatant knockoff of Alien, Inseminoid follows a team of archaeologists and scientists examining the ruins of a distant planet when one of the group, Sandy, is impregnated by an alien creature and starts murdering and devouring her colleagues as a result. If you're still not convinced, the archaeology project is even called the Xeno Project, as in xenomorph. Do you get it yet? Released less than 2 years after Alien on a budget of £1 million, a fraction of Alien's $11 million price tag, Inseminoid gets points for its decent cinematography, solid performances, and amusing sleaziness, even if on the spectacle front its effects and sets fall down hard compared to Ridley Scott's masterpiece. Up until his recent death, director Norman J. Warren maintained that Inseminoid wasn't actually an Alien ripoff, yet the striking conceptual, stylistic, and narrative similarities, well, they speak for themselves. It's certainly not as shameless or lousily crafted as many of the entries on this list, but one suspects that Warren and company knew exactly what they were doing here.
Creature. A huge multinational corporation sends a ship to investigate an alien presence. While investigating, an alien monster finds its way aboard and infects the crew, turning some of them into parasitized extensions of itself. Paranoid and isolated, victimized by gruesome death and sinister sabotage, the crew are forced to fight back, eventually ejecting the creature through the airlock and then blowing it up. That description that I just read out there reads as though it was written in a deliberate attempt to cannibalize the best storylines and set pieces from both Alien and John Carpenter's The Thing, which, by an astonishing coincidence, is exactly what the experience of watching Creature is actually like. When it comes down to it though, Creature isn't really a truly terrible movie. There's a little talent at work here, which unfortunately makes the brazen plot theft all the weirder. It's kind of like shoplifting snacks when you can afford to pay for them, just doing it for a laugh, I guess, because why not?
Metal Man. You might take one look at Metal Man and assume that it's a mockbuster produced by famous knockoff studio The Asylum, and though it was indeed released mere months after 2008's Iron Man, it was actually produced by a lesser-known outfit called Tomcat Films, which are also responsible for 2012's Hulk ripoff The Amazing Bulk. And no, I'm not joking. Metal Man follows a college student who dons a lawsuit-worthy Iron Man-esque battlesuit to fight crime, in this case an evil megalomaniac and his ninja henchman. Clearly the name of the game here was just taking a no-budget Iron Man clone with similar-looking box art to trick a couple of grandmas who were looking to buy Iron Man on DVD for their grandkids. It's charmless slop bucket filmmaking, if you can even call it that, and to top off all of this cynicism, it was subsequently re-released under the title Iron Hero in a craven attempt to wring a little more cash out of the enterprise.
Pet Graveyard. Unfortunately, they can't all be pleasant surprises, and Pet Graveyard is the very definition of an unpleasant surprise. From Mockbuster Factory Millman Productions, hang on, I'm definitely going to have to phone Ash and ask her about that one when I finished here. Pet Graveyard, as should be obvious from the title, is a rip-off of Stephen King's Pet Sematary, churned out to cash in on the new 2019 adaptation of the novel 30 years after the original movie was released. At least, that's how you'd expect things to go, wouldn't you? Because it turns out that Pet Graveyard is not an unofficial remake of Pet Sematary, and the only cash-in here is the title and the poster looking extremely similar. So, what blockbuster movie is this movie mockbusting, I hear you ask? Well, it's 1990's brilliant Flatliners, in which a gang of unfeasibly handsome young movie stars deliberately create near-death experiences and unwittingly bring the ghosts of the past back from beyond the veil. In classic mockbuster fashion here though, everything is done tongue-in-cheek, and throwing subtlety out the window, the movie's antagonist here is actually a guy dressed up as the Grim Reaper, with a distinctly bored-looking Sphinx cat occasionally in tow as well. You kind of have to be impressed. This is a rip-off hiding as another rip-off.
Trancers. Not all rip-offs are actually that bad, as is the case with Trancers, a neon sign-posted amalgam of Blade Runner and the Terminator that's actually pretty damn fun and even holds an impressive 86% on Rotten Tomatoes. Released in late 1984, just 2 years after Blade Runner and literally weeks after the Terminator, Trancers revolves around the hilariously monikered Trooper Jack Death, who travels from the 23rd century back to the 1980s in order to track down a psychic criminal mastermind who is turning people into zombie-like trancers. Unlike every other film on this list, there's a lot of genuine, non-ironic love for trancers, which despite so aggressively riffing off two of the most acclaimed sci-fi films ever, is an entertaining movie in its own right. Produced for a paltry $400,000, Trancers nevertheless made a dogged attempt to replicate the style, tone, and atmosphere of Blade Runner's bleak dystopian world, enough so that director Charles Band gets an A for effort. Incredibly, Trancers ultimately spawned a 6-movie franchise between 1984 and 2002, as well as 2 separate comic book miniseries, and that's quite the success for a film primarily based on a movie which itself bombed at the box office during its original run.
Offerings. Enormously influential, John Carpenter's classic 1978 slasher Halloween still holds up as one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Offerings, on the other hand, is one of those so bad it's okay schlockfests beloved of horror fans across the globe. But everything here lifted from Halloween is awful, from the blank-faced mask of the killer to the familiar soundtrack to the childhood issues of the murderer in question. Funnily enough, it's where Offerings strays from its rigid template that it starts to entertain, with some genuinely good comedic moments that actually land the way they were intended. You kinda get the impression that had the director just gone for an out-and-out parody, that they could have delivered something memorable.
Battletruck. The success of Mad Max, and especially its 1981 sequel, spawned a glut of post-apocalyptic sci-fi action films in a similar vein, such as 1982's Battletruck, or if you live in the US, Warlords of the 21st Century. Armed with a $3 million price tag, which shockingly isn't far off Mad Max 2's own production budget, this New Zealand-produced rip-off is actually pretty fun to a point, if you can forgive the glaring similarities to George Miller's iconic franchise. Set in the aftermath of the oil wars, Battletruck sees former soldier Hunter using his high-tech motorcycle to do battle with the tyrannical Colonel Jacob Straker, who terrorizes the land in a massive armored truck. Though neither the story nor the performances rouse much interest, the sweeping cinematography is quite terrific at times, as are the plentiful explosions and gnarly stunts. As unapologetic cash-ins go, this one at least has a solid level of effort put into its production.
Great White. Released outside of Italy simply as Great White, this bad photocopy of Jaws essentially follows the same plot as Spielberg's classic, just free of the restraint that the film's original director displayed. And that's because the filmmakers here clearly thought that the only thing wrong with Jaws was the slow-burning menace, so here the film introduces its scene-stealing Quint variant early on, played by Vic Morrow in one of his last roles, and the shark bites the duplicitous mayor in half before dragging a helicopter underwater. Unlike the others on this list, this was so blatantly a rip-off that the film's planned North American release was halted after Universal Pictures successfully sued to have it blocked. As a result, it has never been released for home media or shown on TV in the US. Of course, that didn't stop people getting bootlegs to see it for themselves to see just how close the two movies were. And it didn't stop the original distributors either, who took advantage of the lack of widespread information about overseas movie schedules to release their movie in Japan as an official sequel to Jaws, and in Spain as the sequel to Jaws 2. That's just something you could do in the olden days, I guess.
Making Contact. Making Contact, aka Joey, is an especially unhinged ripoff given that it collides two tonally disparate hit movies, E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Poltergeist, into one fascinatingly uneven hodgepodge. Directed by Roland Emmerich years before he became Hollywood's go-to guy for destruction porn, Making Contact follows 9-year-old Joey who makes contact with what he believes is his late father, whilst being terrorized by a demonically possessed ventriloquist dummy called Fletcher. Joey then develops telekinetic powers and ventures into the spirit world in order to do battle with the evil forces that are threatening him and his family. That is a lot to take in. Steven Spielberg's influence looms large over this, which is best characterized as an intriguing failure. Emmerich certainly tries to tie it all together, but the script is such a tonally unwieldy mess of ideas and moods that it lacks the consistency you would expect in an actual Spielberg joint. And the acting is well, let's face it, not good, to be kind. Yet there's just enough enticing style and honest-to-God atmosphere that makes Making Contact a rather memorable curio.
Grizzly. Now, while shark schlock has seen a major renaissance in the last few years, with ghost sharks and even Nazi sharks getting their own movies, one of the earliest and, oddly, most faithful rip-offs of Jaws doesn't actually feature a shark at all. Not even a robot one. Despite the fact that Jaws was still on general release at the time, and the elevator pitch for this movie, which was Jaws but with a giant man-eating bear, was ridiculously simple, 1976's Grizzly was only financed when it was brought to the legendarily dodgy B-movie producer Edward L. Montoro. The resulting movie is almost beat for beat, character for character, a rehash of Jaws. The only slight variation aside from the monster and the setting is the character that stands in for Richard Dreyfuss's Hooper in the story being killed before the grand finale. Oh aye, and the giant prehistoric bear is also killed with a bazooka because, of course it is, why not?
Transmorphers. Of course, this list wouldn't be complete without an offering from straight-to-video schlock peddlers The Asylum, who a week before the release of Michael Bay's first Transformers film dropped this hilariously shameless quasi-parody in stores around the globe. Transmorphers makes a clear attempt by the studio to confuse more casual moviegoers and, again, grandparents who didn't know any better, to sink a few bucks onto a movie that seems to be superficially within the same ballpark as Bay's film. Very superficially, that is. In reality, Transmorphers feels as indebted to the future war scenes in the Terminator franchise as Transformers, given that it takes place in a post-apocalyptic future where alien-piloted robots have conquered Earth and are forcing the surviving humans to live underground. Unsurprisingly, the acting and visual effects here are both absolutely rancid. But what truly sinks Transmorphers is its sheer lack of fun. It's so soulless and boring. If you're going to rip off a $200 million tentpole, at least have some sense of humor about it, right? Yet the business model evidently paid off, as The Asylum made a prequel just 2 years later, Transmorphers Fall of Man, which released a week after Bay's own sequel, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen.
Bakazara, aka Bollywood Evil Dead. The Bollywood film industry is of course infamous for lifting plots and characters from Hollywood blockbusters wholesale, and hey, it can make for some really fun, daft movies. And that's exactly what happened with Bakazara, known unofficially as Bollywood Evil Dead, which follows Sam Raimi's 1981 classic The Evil Dead so closely that it's in danger of tripping over it. The only issue is, despite coming out decades later, the filmmakers don't seem to have the budget Sam Raimi did back in the day. And hell, that original movie was famously made on a micro budget it by talented and enthusiastic auteurs as a labour of love. It's actually not as bad as it sounds. The goofiness is a pretty good fit with the OTT aesthetic of the regular Evil Dead movies, and hey, if you're a devotee of the original movie and don't mind yourself a bit of Bollywood, you could probably find worse ways to spend 90 minutes.
Hobgoblins. You have to begrudgingly hand it to the team behind 1988's Hobgoblins, a Gremlins ripoff so shameless that even the movie's trailer literally refers to the titular creatures as gruesome gremlins. Though there's a faint, campy charm to the cheap-looking creature puppets, make no mistake, this is a roughshod outing from top to bottom, with gutter-level writing and acting throughout. Yet considering that filmmaker Rick Sloan produced it for a mere $15,000, it's hard to get even remotely mad about the film's existence. After all, it was featured in a hilarious Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode, which may as well serve as its ultimate legacy. Incredibly, however, the cult fandom surrounding Hobgoblins was strong enough that Sloan was able to produce a sequel in 2009, over 20 years later, using a script that he wrote shortly after the original's release. Typically, it didn't make much of a dent, with many dismissing it as a follow-up that made an overtly self-conscious effort to be so bad it's good, but was unfortunately just plain bad.
Seytan. Also known as Turkish Exorcist, which really says it all, Seytan is essentially a scene-for-scene remake of William Friedkin's instant classic, made so swiftly that the original was still in Turkish cinemas when this was released. As you can expect, all the big moments from The Exorcist are here. There are some of the basic changes to the plot to make it read more naturally for its intended audience, but it's kind of shocking just how close this follows the original classic. There's a lot more that could have been done here, of course, but creativity was never the point of this endeavour. This is exactly what it says on the tin of pea soup it came in. No more, no less.
Nukie. So you're probably aware of the E.T. ripoff Mac and Me, but what about Nukie? Released in 1987, this South African sci-fi romp revolves around the titular alien who crash lands in Africa and teams up with two local children to rescue his brother, who's been kidnapped by the US government. The similarities in premise alone speak for themselves, and indeed, Nukie is exactly what you'd get if E.T. was made on a shoestring budget without the backing of a major studio or a, skilled cast and crew. Even the production company, Trimark Pictures, sounds like a knockoff of TriStar Pictures, which was founded 2 years prior. Yet what truly sinks Nukie isn't the terrible script or atrocious acting, but Nukie himself. The creature design is less adorably ugly like E.T., and more genuinely nightmarish, even putting aside its evidently thrown together conception. It's painful to say it, but if you're going to hedge your bets on one E.T. ripoff, it should probably be Mac and Me, which is at least good for some honest-to-God laughs.
Mahakaal. One of the last films created by schlock legends, the Ramsay brothers, a family business synonymous with popular horror cinema in India, Mahakaal is more or less a straight lift of Wes Craven's 1984 classic A Nightmare on Elm Street, only with an added extra 30 minutes or so of goofy comedy and song and dance numbers to get the crowd going. The dedication to the bit here is actually kinda impressive, as the Ramsay brothers have religiously copied almost everything that isn't a Bollywood-style embellishment. The camera angles, the scene setups, the deaths, which are also cribbed from other entries in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, by the way, and even the soundtrack, which is essentially a re-recorded version of the original Nightmare on Elm Street score. The thing is, unlike other movies, Freddy Krueger is not scary because of the knives on his fingers or the scars on his face. He's scary because he's the grotesque embodiment of the fear that we cannot keep our children safe from the horrors of the world. This dude, though, he's just a big guy in a cheap mask. I'm afraid there's no substitute here for the original. I mean, even Hollywood found this out when they got Jackie Earle Haley to play Freddy in their remake.
Metamorphosis. 1990's Metamorphosis is the unruly bastard child of both The Fly and Reanimator, where a brilliant scientist tests his anti-aging experiments on himself, which causes him to begin a hideous transformation into a grotesque creature. As Italian knockoffs and classic sci-fi flicks go, Metamorphosis is hardly terrible, albeit constrained by both its low-budget creature effects and a lack of general ambition to be much more than, The Fly with a spicing of Reanimator. Hilariously, the film was actually even called Reanimator 2 in Italy. Filmmaker George Eastman is no David Cronenberg, but honestly, who is? And so he can't much persuade the audience to take his film's climax seriously, in which our ambitious scientist completes his mutation into an oversized lizard man. Again, for the standards of ramshackle, no-budget Italian cash-ins, it could be much worse. But if you go in expecting a fun, frothy sci-fi special effects showcase, prepare to be bitterly disappointed by the unintentionally goofy results.